Hello, everyone. It's great to see you today. I'm so excited to have day 2 of the effective literacy practices for BC educators, focusing on holistic, science-informed, evidence-based information and resources. Today, we have some great presentations lined up, starting with Erin, Trask, and Kate Lyon with their Ready, Set, Play throughout the day, incorporating brain-based playful learning into your Tier 1 reading instruction. At 10:30, we will have Catherine Tavarnwork joining us for improving reading fluency using nonfiction texts. At 11 o'clock, Karina Fitzner joins us for Big Bangs for the Buck, research-based approaches to teaching vocabulary and comprehension in secondary and intermediate grades. At 12 o'clock, we have our panel discussion where all of the presenters from the symposium over 2 days will join us for a live question and answer session. I'm really excited for this because we've had some great information in the chat so far. Now, I want to introduce you to a powerful dynamic duo from School District 52 in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. They are going to take us to some amazing activities that we can do with our students to help build that reading. So thank you for joining me, Kate and Erin. I will put the show in your hands.
I'm Gunflack. Good morning. I'm just going to set up the share screen. There we go. How does that look, Dr. Garforth?
Awesome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Erin, and
I'm Kate.
And we're excited to be with you guys today to present on play-based but explicit and systematic literacy instruction in kindergarten, what it can look like, and kind of share some of what our students have been doing and successes that we've seen by switching our practice to be more in line with brain-based literacy learning.
Thank you, Dr. Garforth, for inviting us today to share our learning journey. We've heard some great presenters yesterday, and this is a snapshot of what we have been doing in our classroom. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that we are very grateful to be learning and playing on the unceded territory of the Tsimshian and Semitic speaking peoples who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. And as an act of truth and reconciliation, Erin and I recognize literacy as a social justice issue, and we are committed to teaching all children how to read and write with proficiency. The image you see on your screen is actually the view from my living room window. And this picture was taken on a late spring morning. And across the street from me is Cedar Village, which is a senior residence complex. And you can see how the architecture and design of the building incorporates some of the rich Indigenous Tsimshian culture that we are immersed in here in Prince Rupert. At the center of the complex is a cedar hat design with the top having a beautiful skylight. And directly underneath the cedar hat is a place of gathering for the residents and their families. We've spent many mornings, many afternoons and evenings in my living room, sitting by the window, talking about reading instruction, talking about best practices, discussing all the books that we've been reading over the last several years. And of course, we've been spending a lot of time the last few days putting this slide deck together for you. So we'll move on and show you the shape of the session.
All right, so the shape of the session is going to look a little bit like this. We're going to start by sharing just a little bit about ourselves and our careers and what the aha moment was, what it was that kind of brought Kate and I both at around the same time in our careers to thinking about reading instruction and what we were doing in our classrooms and what wasn't working for us, and sort of to seek out the knowledge to find out what we could be doing differently to meet the needs of all of our learners, not just some of our learners. Then we're going to go just very briefly into the reading brain. It was touched on quite a bit yesterday by different presenters, so we're not going to get too scientific about it. but we will touch on that. We'll talk about the elements of a playful and effective reading instruction. We'll take a little bit of a look at what whole group activities look like in kindergarten and what adult-directed small groups would look like. They kind of differentiate the needs based on what the kids have learned in whole group. We're going to spend some time looking at literacy centers, which are mostly independent practice of skills that have been taught. They might be monitored by an adult, but the kids are kind of working a little more on their own. We're going to look at some materials that we have found helpful. Less is more. We don't need to have a lot of stuff. We don't have a program. We're putting things together on our own. It's really important to know that you can do this without a program. And then there are lots of materials you probably have in your classrooms or in your school already. So less is more. And we'll finish with a quick wrap up.
Okay, here we go.
So the code word for anyone who would like to get a certificate at the end, our code words are ready, set, play, and there will be a QR code at the end of our presentation for that.
We wanted to take a moment and just pause and remember that this is our summer vacation time, and we're very grateful that you're here with us and taking a moment out of your summer to join us in this learning. We have our happy places, of course, that we like to be in the summer. The one on the left is a picture of the view from the cabin in North Beach, Haida Gwaii, that my family retreats to every summer. And this is just a wonderful place to get off the grid. I find that I read a lot here, of course, lots of family time, but I find the time away from the classroom is really when I am able to reflect on my practice, on what's happening in my classroom. And it just gives me a chance to pause and reset for the upcoming September year.
And the other picture is my cabin on Porcher Island, which is just south of Prince Rupert. You can only get there by boat or float plane. We just bought a boat, so we get out there that way quite quickly. My husband is there right now. I am not, but when I am there, you can see we have a lovely porch. It's a beautiful place to sit and look out at the ocean, read a book, do some reflecting, and as the summer moves on from now, that's a place that I'm hoping to be spending some time.
Mm-hmm. So just a little bit about ourselves. I started teaching in 1997 and have spent all my time here in Prince Rupert and the surrounding communities teaching. I've been in numerous positions, both in and out of the classroom. However, it wasn't until 2017 when I hopped back into the classroom that I realized that something wasn't right, that I had a class where the majority of learners were not reading and writing at grade level. And it was a real challenge for me. And I had to place myself in a position of vulnerability and ask colleagues for help. And I am really grateful that I have a network of colleagues and friends here in town that I could turn to and say, I need help. This is a challenge that I have never experienced before. And I wanted to make sure that I had the right information and the right supports so that I could then in turn support the children in having them become proficient readers and writers.
And I've been teaching since I graduated PDP in December 1993. So I started teaching locally here in Prince Rupert in January of 1994. I've taught K-6 and LST. The bulk of my teaching has been either in LST learning services or in kindergarten, which is sort of my happy place. I love to see kids developing those skills and the joy and the excitement that they get when they're learning, and you can really see they're learning. So I was here teaching for till about 2007. We moved away to Quesnel for 10 years. Quesnel is a wonderful place to live and work, and I appreciate my time there. We moved back to Prince Rupert in 2017. I got a chance in 2018 to be on staff with Kate again. We'd worked together in the 90s or the late 90s, early 2000s, I guess. Yeah. And so it was nice to work with her again before I popped back into kindergarten when I had the opportunity. But that year, 2018, was kind of when we both really had our aha moments. I was doing LST, seeing a lot of what Kate was talking about, really got my wheels turning. What is going on here? These kids are not gaining the skills that they need to become proficient readers? What can we be doing differently? It has to be something that we need to do differently. So lots of reflecting on our practice.
So we had 3 guiding questions that really made it clear to us that we had to dig deep and answer. So the first one is, what skills do children really need to become proficient readers and writers? And what do we as classroom teachers need to know? And how do we change our practice to ensure our learners are developing these skills? So in our readings, that's where we had our aha moment.
It is where we had our, I think we started, or David Kilpatrick, Quit for Reading Success was probably the first book that I read. And it was like, orthographic mapping, why don't I know this? Why don't all teachers know this? Why were we not taught this at university? I mean, here I am well into my 20 years of teaching, finally coming across this information that we should have had all along.
And that led us down many rabbit holes and to seek out more information and to connect with other colleagues. So it was a steep learning curve for us. And we've been on this journey for 5 years now. So there's always lots to learn. But again, we're grateful that you're here with us to share some of the learning that we have found success within our classroom.
So the reading brain, I love this meme. I think that's Game of Thrones, isn't it? One does not simply learn to read naturally. Reading is not a natural process. Children pick up language because it's a biologically primary skill. Being surrounded by language, you will pick up language. But you do not pick up reading by being surrounded by reading. Human beings were never born to read. We invented reading and then had to teach it to every new generation. And I'm going to highlight the word teach it. We must teach children how to read. That's a quote from Marianne Wolf. But I think it's really important. Some kids pick up reading fairly easily, so easily it may seem like it is natural, but it's not. So really being targeted and explicit in our instruction is going to be beneficial to all of our learners. And so it's really important to be making sure that we're teaching the skills that kids need.
We came across a webinar in the spring, and we've got a QR code and the link at the bottom. It's by Dr. Carolyn Strom, and
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing, and really geared toward early learning and the early years. And she's a storyteller, and she knows that storytelling is really important. And she created this webinar and this story to explain how the brain learns to read. And it's great for parents. It breaks it down into simple language and gives us lots of ideas and strategies about how we might go about doing that. So you might want to scan that with your QR code. We've got several QR codes and links coming up, so do take note. We wanted to also mention that it's so important that we share our joy of reading and our excitement of reading with our children. Of course, we do that in everything we do in the classroom. We wanted to start with this cute little video of this little guy from my classroom who absolutely...
I'm smiling already thinking about it. It's so stinking cute.
I probably watched it 100 times. It's very inspiring, but it shows how laborious the process is for a child who is learning how to read. But it's absolutely amazing because you can hear the pride and the joy in his voice, and he just exudes that. So turn up the volume and we'll play this little video.
Red.
Where did it?
Red.
Do the next one. Isn't that great? That little guy was reading just before December 2021, and the video footage is from January. He was one of my high flyers, but it's just so exciting to see kids and have their aha moments when they're breaking down the code and they're able to do simple decodable text. It's really super awesome that this is happening in kindergarten and that we know the kids are ready for it.
Okay, playful and effective reading instruction. Tell me again, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, all those words with PH at the beginning, phonics, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, what do they mean?
We're gonna just spend a brief moment explaining those two terms. Phonological awareness is actually an umbrella term, as many of you know, of course, and it refers to the sound structures in language. So other examples would be syllables, word awareness, alliteration, and phonemic awareness is also falling under the umbrella term of phonological awareness. And when we talk about phonemic awareness, we're talking about the smallest unit of sound that we hear. So we're going to spend a little more time on phonemic awareness specifically. The research is showing us that we need to get to the phonemes for children to be able to develop those skills for reading and writing.
So reading in the early years has some components to it, and the ones that we're going to talk the most about today are the really important skill of oral language. Kids need to have words, they need to know lots of words, those rich conversations and read alouds and all that good stuff that happens prior to starting school are really important for kids. If children don't get that, it's important for us to make sure it happens in our classrooms. Concepts of print, phonemic awareness, sound letter relationships, and having a scope and sequence that you follow is really important, and comprehension.
At the bottom of the screen is a quote from Dr. Stephen Dykstra. I know Mel referenced him. Do find him online. He's got several webinars, but this quote really speaks to us. One of the best ways to love and care for children, especially those experiencing trauma, is to teach them to read. And so we know we have children in our classes, especially during this pandemic, that are experiencing trauma. But also we have to remember that trauma comes in the form of learning in the classroom as well, that for children who really struggle with reading, that is daily trauma. So we're very aware that this is an aspect of teaching in our class, and we continue to work on reading and writing despite those trauma issues that are there. It's even more important that we teach kids to read. I'm just going to take a moment and talk about oral language. This is sort of a biggie, and this is where a lot of my learning has been in the last few years. It's been apparent that children are coming into my classroom with learning gaps and learning deficits. I'm seeing in my classroom in particular more concerns regarding speech and language articulation. So I'm working very closely with our kindergarten team. Of course, that would be LST, SLP, and OT. One of the biggest things that I've picked up in the last couple of years has been about tiered vocabulary, and also for children obtaining background knowledge. So when we have kids that are coming into kindergarten that don't have those rich life experiences, that don't have background knowledge from those experiences or from conversations that may or may not be happening at home, providing opportunities to build language and to expand vocabulary is absolutely critical to the reading process. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. On the screen, you see there's a infographic of tiered vocabulary. And what this is division into 3 parts. Tier 1 language words are everyday words that are familiar to most students. Tier 2 language is robust academic vocabulary words that we would see in content areas like science, social studies, math. And then Tier 3 words are really specific words to a particular topic. So in kindergarten, what that might look like is your dramatic play. And so this was also something that our team worked hard on over the last 3 years to really expand and to provide lots of variety. And you all know that putting together dramatic play centers is a lot of work. I'm really fortunate. We've got a great team and lots of support at the school to make it happen. Storage is an issue, but we're working on that. So as an example, I just wanted to show you what tiered vocabulary might look like in a science lab. So you can see the picture at the bottom there. We had a mad science lab around Halloween last year. And so for tier 1 language, we might include words like mix, fill, and goggles. Tier 2 might be a little more specific, more robust, and that would include words like beaker, laboratory, experiment, and then tier 3 word could be hypothesis. And so we found that when we were able to focus on tiered vocabulary, it really gave us direction, and that we were explicitly teaching these words to children to make sure that they were able to say them, that they could pronounce them, that they knew what it felt like in their mouth, and that they were able to use them in their language, whether it was in dramatic play or throughout the day. And this, of course, goes with background knowledge. For kids that don't have these rich experiences, dramatic play gives them an opportunity to practice. But we did notice in my particular classroom that we had kids where they would play in dramatic play centers in silence. And we found that quite alarming, that this was supposed to be a rich, back and forth conversation, and we had to address the fact that kids were not always comfortable sharing their language skills or practicing their language skills. So what we ended up doing is ensuring that we could explicitly teach these dramatic play centers. We assigned one of our team members to work, whether it was during unstructured play, or we even put it in our small group centers that were explicitly taught by an adult. So this really helped kids gain that knowledge and gain that experience. We also put up on the wall a very simple template. It wasn't fancy by any stretch, but we put words. We would, as a team, brainstorm the words that we would want kids to know and to practice and have in their lexicon. So all those things really showed a dramatic improvement in kids' language skills. A couple other points. If kids are going to be writing in sentences, they need to be speaking in sentences. So we really had to make sure that we practiced syntax and grammar. We gave them lots of opportunities to practice throughout the day. We even included opportunities for them to have one-on-one conversations with a grown-up so that we could check in with them and see if they were developing those language skills.
So concepts of print. I know this is something that most of us make sure to be working on in kindergarten, but kids really need to have, and a lot of them come to kindergarten with some awareness of this if you're reading books to them at home, but they need to have a sense of the directionality of print, that print moves from left to right. They have to have an awareness of words and that the words have meaning. They have to have an awareness of the spaces between words, and also to know that the letters in words spell sounds in speech. Part of concepts of print is fluency, and of course, when you've got little ones in K and 1 and even grade 2, fluency can be a challenge for them when we're learning how to decode. It does sound very bumpy and effortful, and it's a little bit difficult to listen to. So having opportunities for kids to experience fluent reading is really important. It's important for them to work on also things like their articulation and work on their expression. So we do a lot of that using text that's bigger than, so you might use a big book or poems on a sentence strip. Kate creates a lot of local place-based poems and chants that she uses with her class. I do a lot of poems in the pocket chart, especially at the beginning of the year. So I would read to them, we would read it line by line, we would read it together. The kids would have a week or so of practice. And so by the end, there was a poem or a piece of text that they were able to read with fluency, really feel like what it feels like to be a reader. So here's a little example of a guy who was just during Play Center. My poems are up all the time, and was choosing to go over and practice his reading.
Eating under tree. I like salad. I like stew. I like eating next to you.
I think another point that we were talking about early is to make sure that all these lovely rich materials are available for kids to seek out on their own. That's been amazing too, to see that kids are wanting to recreate that joyful experience on their own at any time throughout the day.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so phonemic awareness. Now we are not going to touch really today on phonological
awareness in general.
Awareness in general, but I think I want to at least make a point of saying that there was a lot of thinking. I know I believed this earlier on before I started learning a bit more, was things like we needed to make sure kids mastered some of the phonological awareness skills before they moved on, and that things kind of moved up in a hierarchy. It's not that simple, and it's more wavy than steps up. And what we've kind of been learning, and what I understand a lot of the more current research to be, is that getting to the phonemes in words as quickly as possible is really important, and you don't need to wait until maybe a child has mastered rhyme or alliteration or syllables. You can always be working on those things, but getting to the phonemes as quickly as possible is really helpful.
So we're just going to show you a few examples, and the first word is this one.
So we've got the word hat. When I'm working on phonemic awareness with my students, we would maybe show them a picture card like this, and then we would talk about the sounds that we hear in the word hat. So I would tap the sounds. In hat, you hear ah. Try to be really super crisp with your sounds, at, and then blend it together to the word hat. So that is an example of a CBC word. We've got a consonant, vowel, consonant, 3 letters spelling 3 sounds. But you can also have examples like the word fish, and before you've connected them to letters, you would just be listening for the sounds, and that would be a 3-sound word, much like hat, fish, fish. And or the word shell, same as hat and fish, it has 3 phonemes or sounds to the word, sh, shell. So it's important for kids to be able to hear those sounds, but it's also important for kids to be able to connect the letters to the sounds, and we've really been trying to do that very, very quickly as well. And it will really give kids sort of an eye-opening moment to see that a word can have 3 sounds in it, but it does not mean that it's spelled with 3 letters. And kids getting the understanding of the alphabetic principle that the letters of the alphabet are codes for the sounds in our speech. So you can see that the word hat has 3 sounds, and spelled with 3 letters, but fish has 3 sounds and it's spelled with 4 letters, and shell has 3 sounds and it's spelled with 5 letters. So that's a really important concept for kids to get, and it's really helpful for them to understand that. So when we're working on phonemic awareness, initial sounds are the easiest for kids to start learning to hear. So we would work on initial sounds first, then move on to the final sound in words, and then finally the medial sound. The middle sound in the CVC word can be quite tricky for that vowel sound to be able to tune our ears into it and to hear it. Like I was just saying, it is more if we can do phonemic awareness in the dark. You do not need to be able to see anything to do it. You're just hearing the sounds in words, but it is more effective if you pair it with the letters that represent or spell the sounds. And being aware of phonemes in words helps with blending and segmenting, which are essential skills for decoding and for spelling.
When we go into sound letter relationships, we are thinking about getting the best bang for our buck. Mm-hmm. And so the scope and sequence that we follow is what is referred to as the SAT pin sequence. On the left of the screen, you'll see that there's a free poster that we downloaded from
Tiny Steps Make Big Strides.
Tiny Steps.
Their website is down currently, but it will be up again soon.
Yeah, you can check them out on Facebook as well. That is up and running. Do you want to talk about this for a little bit? Was that you?
Sure.
Okay.
So it was a big epiphany for me well, actually there was 2 shifts that I made. First was switching from a letter a week to a letter a day. Now that was huge. And when I was doing a letter a week, you think like, well, maybe March, you finish the alphabet. That's not a lot of opportunity for kids to move their way through the alphabet and learn the letters and sounds. So shifting to a letter a day-ish was really, really important. But then in the last year or so, I've also switched away from teaching the sounds in alphabetical order. If you teach them by the SAT pin order, you'll see SATPIN yield about, I think it's 20 VC vowel consonant like at or CVC words. So if you are teaching in that order, once the kids know those 6 letters, they can start to read and spell words. You do not need to wait until you've made your way through the alphabet or I usually get through about five times in the course of a year, but you can start that work with your students super, super early. So I think it's really important and valuable to think about having a scope and sequence. It doesn't have to be SAPPIN. There's lots of different ones out there, but this is the one that we have both been using.
And in order to do that, we do provide obviously a lot of scaffolding, and we found this wonderful resource that we start off with when we do our SAPPIN order. And these are called embedded picture mnemonics. And this came from a website in Australia called Spellphabet, and I believe Lisa mentioned it yesterday, and a lot of wonderful, rich resources coming from Spellphabet, including their webinars that are available on YouTube. But these particular embedded picture mnemonics have been a real game changer, and they are so fun, and there's so many ways to use them and incorporate them into your classroom. So you can see that it's not just an image associated with the sound, that the picture, the image itself is the symbol or grapheme. And so we have snake, apple, tiger, penguin, insect, and noodle. What I found though is that I have language learners that are still developing vocabulary, even tier 1 vocabulary. So I really had to make sure that the kids had the right word associated to the embedded picture mnemonic. So for example, insect was a word that many of my children didn't know. And so they would say fly, they would say caterpillar or bug. And I really had to explicitly teach the vocabulary that goes with the picture itself. And this particular set of picture mnemonics included digraphs as well. So it's important that kids know when we combine certain letters, they might make a new sound. So when combined would make for thunder. And then we have cheese and shell. And then we would move on if the kids are ready. We follow our scope and sequence and also include what's called vowel teams. So we have IE for I, and the picture is tie. We have E for B, and then OI for coin. And so we have found these so fun and so playful. Lots of ways to use them in the classroom. It was the best $10 I spent.
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
years ago.
Once you buy them, you can make them whole page, you can make them half page, you can make little tiny ones.
I have a Velcro wall in my classroom, and we use it for a variety of things. So this is one of the activities that we do with the embedded picture mnemonics. And this would be earlier in the year for term 1. The cards are left out, so the kids would be happy to play with them. We use pointers. The kids come up and they put them on. There's just so many opportunities to play with these lovely picture cards. And then from there, we can segue into what we would call our code cards with the regular letters of the alphabet. And so that's a great scaffolding piece. And I know, Erin, you have them up on your wall, and we use them in small group instruction as well. Just a really great resource. Ooh, comprehension. This is always the goal, is to have kids gain more knowledge and understanding and what they're reading and what they're learning and what they're hearing in their world. But there were a few things that we picked up along the way that really made a world of difference in our classroom. And we found it to be really helpful. So we thought we'd share some of that with you. We're doing rich read alouds in our classroom. I try and get 3 or 4 in a day. It's always tricky, I know, but I want to make sure I'm exposing kids to as much language and as much knowledge as possible. One of the shifts that I've made, though, is that I've really tried to bump up my nonfiction read alouds. We want to make sure that the kids have more background knowledge, and we're always pushing the limit and expanding their understanding. And we know that background knowledge is so important when it comes to reading and lifting text off the page. Kids have to be familiar with those words. They have to be familiar with those concepts that we teach them through language learning. And that is directly connected to the reading and reading comprehension.
Yeah, that background knowledge is absolutely key to kids being able to comprehend what they read. You need to have some background knowledge about it. And when we've got kids coming into school, especially kids maybe haven't had a rich life experience, that knowledge has to be explicitly taught for them to have it, to be able to use it to comprehend what they're what they're reading or what we're reading to them.
And so we're continuing to teach explicit vocabulary, and I did some reading with Anita Archer and her explicit instruction textbook, and I began to choose my read alouds very differently. I was using a vocabulary lens, if you will, and was looking specifically for books that had rich text and rich opportunities to expand vocabulary. So just to demonstrate, here's one of my favorite books, The Great Grizzlies Go Home. I'm sure you have it as well in your library. It's by Judy Hilgeman. I would teach explicitly before reading the book. I would find words that may not have the best context clues. So for this book, conservation officer, investigated, tranquilized, currents, tides, swamp, peaceful. I really would take just a very brief moment, nothing laborious, just very quick overview of those words to ensure that they had an understanding of those words. And that I'd also find words in the text that might correlate very well with a photo or an image or illustration, where we could quickly talk about the word and maybe discuss what that word might mean. So during reading, they had a great text line: the two big bears clambered out of the ocean onto a rocky beach. And the illustration really showed that. We might add a kinesthetic component to it, and we might then, after the read, clamber to our lineup if we were heading back outside for recess. So it was really important to increase those opportunities for conversation, again, to develop comprehension, and to integrate content and literacy instruction. So we're always finding ways to combine what they know from our scope and sequence and how to bring it into the content areas like science and socials, and really bump up those content knowledge-rich subjects: science, social studies, math, and so on. So a book that we read that was just another big wow aha moment was Natalie Wexler's The Knowledge Gap. Put it on your list. Fantastic read.
Absolutely fantastic.
And the quote you see came from her book. Knowledge, like Velcro, sticks best to other related knowledge. We have to build that background knowledge for our children.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about whole group instruction and small group instruction. We try to make sure that everything we want the kids to know is covered whole group, but at the same time, we also want to be mindful of what kids are picking up, which kids need a little bit more instruction, and that gives us the opportunity to offer differentiation in small group work with adults. So a huge part, really, really crucially important part, a sacred part of my day is our code instruction. As we talked about earlier, a sound a day, give or take, but a sound a day. And we are always introducing a new sound and then reviewing all of the ones we saw. So every day we learn something new. Every day we review our past learning as well. So they just get that constant reinforcement of what the letter looks like and what sound that it spells. This year, I did not focus so much, at least the first time through the alphabet, on the name of the letter. It's not so important for learning how to read. If they can look at a grapheme or a letter and know what sound it spells, they're off to the races. So code review would be 6 to 8 minutes. It's a little really, really quick, perky pace. We like that perky pace.
Keep it going.
The activities that we might do with the letter sound would vary according to where we are in our scope and sequence and which round through the alphabet we're working on, but it happens every single day. So you can see there's a photograph there of what I call a magic bag. It's just a little gift bag. And every day the first round through the alphabet, I would have little things hidden inside of it, little treasures. And that one you can see I've got a seal and a sun and a spider. So I would say to the kids, we're going to learn some code today. And in this bag, there are things that are going to give us a clue to what our code is. So volunteers would come up and they pull out, I pulled out a sun, and you stretch that beginning sound out for them. And someone pulled out a seal. Someone pulled out a spider. I wonder what sounds do all of these things have in common? And usually there's at least one or two that pick that up, and you can say, well, yes, they do all begin with the sound S, and that's spelled with the letter S. Then I might segue into a little alphabet book, which I would hold up and this is the S book. What do you think we might find in this book? And the fact that we've just done the bag is going to give them some cues, and kids will be raising their hand. I think there's going to be a sun in there. I bet there might be a seal. And then we would read the little alphabet book. The embedded picture mnemonics would be what I would use the first round or so through code. And then I switch over, you can see those little code cards. The vowels are red and the consonants are blue. And every day I hold up the card and I just say sound is, letter is, and they go S, and then flip to the next one, P, super duper fast. But make sure that that is happening every single day. Kate and I are both also, and this would happen during code time, especially earlier in the year, making sound sorts on our smartboard. It could be an initial sound sort, and Kate's doing a much better job right now than me of making sure that the pictures are place-based. I'm usually kind of scrambling to find things, but there's an example of one of Kate's where they were sorting pictures by their initial sound. And then in the bottom corner, there's a little girl in my class, and that's a little bit later in the year, probably second round through the alphabet. We were listening for the ending sound in words. So she was sorting some pictures by whether they ended with the sound T of T or D of D.
Yeah, let's move on to our whole group ideas that we found success with. And this one was directed drawing and dictation.
So fun. They
So
love
fun.
it.
And they absolutely look forward to it. It's a great activity to build routines. And it starts simply, and then we follow a scope and sequence as well. So you can see the first journal is of a CVC word, cat. And do you want to talk about that? That was something that you wanted to.
Right. Okay. So I started doing my directed drawings and dictations the second time we were making our way through the alphabet. So this is November. So we were doing the code K, spelled by the letter C. So I would say to the kids like, oh, our sound today is K. We're going to draw a picture of something begins with K. And I wouldn't tell them what it was we were drawing. So I would be drawing on the smartboard. And I used a lot of my pictures came from the book, the animated alphabet, which is quite old. It's got some good stuff there in it. So I would be drawing and they would be drawing, and the whole time they're yelling out like, oh, I think it's going to be a caterpillar, or I think it's going to be a cow, and they're guessing what it is. And someone might guess it's going to be a dog, and then someone will say, well, no, it's not going to be a dog. This is K. And eventually they would figure out that, oh, we've just finished drawing a cat, and then we would work together to sound out, okay, cat, what sounds do we have to spell? K. How do we spell K? And someone would say C, and then how do we spell A? And how do we spell T? And so that would be coming from the kids. I wouldn't be telling them how to spell it. We would be segmenting together and then spelling the sounds in the word.
Yeah, and then we'd move into short phrases, so 2 or 3 word phrases. So always developing concept of print, talking about space in between words. The letters in a word are closer together. We also did some scaffolding by adding what we call sky, grass, ground. Perhaps some of you have heard that and use it in your classrooms as well. There's lots of free resources that you can download. And so this one was a dog. So we're trying to now put in some high frequency words into the kids' practice. And then the third journal is incorporating a full sentence into the directed drawing. So you can see that the sentence structure is there, and it's also a review of the basic code that the kids have already practiced in their whole group instruction in their code time.
And concepts of print. So when I would have the kids do the sentence, I would say, after we'd drawn the picture and they knew what it was, I would say, okay, our sentence is, this is a nest. How many words are in this is a nest? This is a nest. Oh, that's 4 words. Now let's spell the first word. And same thing, the kids are eliciting the spelling. I'm not doing that for them. They are practicing their code. And we always stop after a word and make sure to say, okay, now we need to leave us finger space. Maybe not the best finger spacing on that particular example, but they're also really trying to use the lines properly as well.
So as we progress throughout the year, journals are becoming sort of more of a daily routine or several times a week. And it starts with their knowledge from the code that they've learned. And so often this is the beginning sounds. That's the easier task for the kids. And so I have a clip of one of my learners. He came in as ESL, and language was very limited in English as it was not his first language. But when we did this journal in March, he was clearly able to demonstrate that he heard those beginning sounds. So have a listen as he reads his journal back.
Words. I like my sister.
Okay. So I could point out from his journal write that there were a couple of things that I wanted to pay attention to and maybe debrief with him. One was the letter I. He knew that the letter I starts in the sky and then goes down to the grass or down to the dirt, but he kept his eye in the sky. So we wanted to correct that and make sure that for the next journal, he had the correct formation of that letter. But you can also see that he had all his beginning sounds correct. So that was a great assessment piece for me.
Okay, the middle examples are some earlier year journals in my class. When we first start doing journals, they do the picture first, and then I tell them they can practice printing their name. They can print the initial sounds or to label their picture, or they can spell more sounds if they can hear more sounds. So the top one, the drawing was done, and then she has labeled the S for sun and the H for house and the D for dog. And I don't know if you can tell, but you can see that she did a T first for dog and then changed it to a D. We probably prompted her on that. But when you think about it, the sound D and the sound T are made in your mouth exactly the same way when your voice is on, D, and for the letter T sound T, your voice is off. So we do talk a lot about that with the kids as well. The manner of articulation or how we say the sounds and whether we have our vocal cords on and off.
And the last journal was from one of my little guys who had missed a considerable amount of school, but he had picked up some of the vocabulary that we were working on, some of those high frequency words, so he was able to do that. The assignment or the focus was to share a feeling, how they were feeling that day. And so I am, and the is for happy. So I could determine that he understood the beginning sound, but it was a lot of work. And I could recognize that this was a lot of work that he had maxed out with cognitive load. And so after he finished his H printing, we moved on to his drawing. So that is also really important, is to tune in and to be able to provide individual scaffolding for the kids, knowing where they are and what their abilities are, and anything else that's affecting their learning for that day. We always have that in mind.
I think it's important. Journals are a really good place to see what they are hearing in words and what sounds are able to connect to them. So really analyzing what errors they're making, what's really successful. I didn't mention my other little one down there, but you can see that he'd been labeling beginning sounds in the first one, and the second one, you can tell that they're hearing beginning and ending sounds in words. So all that is information that you can use for targeting their instruction.
So later in the year, we continue with whole group journals. And there are a few things that you might want to note, that some of the journals are cross-curricular in content. So again, looking for opportunities to combine what they know about reading and writing with the bigger content area subjects. You want to talk about your journals?
So usually, especially later in the year, we start doing our writing first and our drawings second. And I always give kids the option to write about what they would like to write about. But I also usually will say, well, this is something we've been learning about. Maybe if you're not sure what you want to write about, you want to connect it to some of our learning. So a little example there, we'd read the book, Sometimes I Feel Like a Fox. And a little guy had written, I feel like skeek, which he was trying to spell the word laskeek, which is eagle in Somaliac. So I feel like skeek, I know a lot of stuff. Another little girl has written, I feel like a rabbit because I jump high. And then in the second journal example, you can see a student who has in one journal decided to write what she wanted to. And this is the end of the year. And I think the practice with the dictated sentences has given them a good opportunity to practice writing on the lines and the spacing. So she had written, I checked in the fridge, there was only cucumbers. And then we were learning about plants in May and June. And so she chose to write about plants and wrote, I see a plant, it has lots of bugs around it. There's high frequency words spelled correctly there. She's got, we've learned some vowel teams, so the word C is spelled correctly. This is all independent writing. So the kids are having the opportunity to practice what they know about code and use it to write a message.
Also, just to make a note that from the sky, grass, ground lines, it provides a scaffold to moving into the full interline books.
Right, yes.
So something to consider. We do a lot of whole group activities that is separate from our code instruction. And we can provide a lot of scaffolding opportunities, a lot of playful activities. Erin's going to talk about her word chains.
So just really briefly about that, word chains I've discovered last year and are a really powerful tool for kids for practicing reading and spelling. So the photograph is an example of using word chains for spelling. The kids have spelled the word pat, so they would write 3 little lines on their whiteboard. I would say a word, we would sound out the parts, they would spell them, and then I would say 1, 2, 3, everybody show me your whiteboard, and they would flip their whiteboard and show their word, and then we would switch to the next word in the chain. I would tell them, okay, now we're going to change pat to say bat, and they would figure out where the change in sound was and spell the new sound. I also do the same thing for reading using a movable alphabet on my smartboard. So this way they are reading rather than spelling. So I would start with a word like sat and then switch a sound. And as I switch out the code, they're reading out loud the new word. And these are also activities that I would scaffold kids who needed some extra support, and we would do the similar activities in small group as well.
The image that you have with the letter tiles is from a website called EdShed. There are several that are free, so you can access that EdShed and find your movable letter tiles that way. Another activity that we wanted to showcase is what it might look like to incorporate other aspects of curriculum or place-based learning. I've got a little video here. It looks like my pants are on fire and I'm screaming for help, but I'm going to show the video in a second. We were reviewing our vowel sounds because we were focusing at the time on the middle sounds, the medial sounds of basic CBC words. So I wanted to give the kids some scaffolding practice to review, and then we'd move into our spelling activity. So just another way to make things playful and fun in the classroom and to allow kids to participate and be part of that direct learning.
So then we move into small group instruction, and small group instruction is always led by an adult, preferably the teacher. You may have an EA in your room that might take a small group as well, but this is where we are differentiating for kids and giving kids small group practice with the skills that they are ready to work on in our scope and sequence.
So we're mindful of time, so we're going to pick up a little bit in our pacing. You can see on the left of the screen, this is where we'll start with our embedded picture mnemonics, maybe working on individual sounds or teaching that vocabulary that is associated with the image. Moving into sound sorts, just with pictures and including the letter symbols. We like to keep things very tactile, so we're using letter magnets or letter tiles, and starting very simply, and then eventually when we've got some fine motor control and we've got some letter formation and print practice, we will incorporate that into our Elkonin boxes where they are starting to encode and decode. And we have a little video here of what we would do in small group instruction for reading.
So yeah. Decodable text would happen in small group instruction. So you can see a little guy, it's effortful, but he's excited about what he's doing and he's applying what he knows about letter sounds to read a decodable book.
I am hopping.
Good job.
On the cat. I am hopping on a pig. On the pig.
You can see that Erin's hand is covering up the picture, so we know that the children are very much focused on the word.
And it's always, we're not giving them books that contain code that they have not been taught. So it's really important to make sure they're practicing their decoding skills using just the sounds that they know. And as Kate pointed out, I do have the pictures covered up with my hand.
Another QR code link for Anita Archer's video on explicit instruction. Fantastic. Highly recommend you take a look at that on YouTube.
So a little bit more small group instruction. These are kids playing some reading games. That the first one is a template that I made. I used the template from The Measured Mom, but I've added my own words to it. So we were reading words that had blends at the ending. And here's a quick example.
Help.
Help.
I'm One, two. Missed.
And another game example, also I believe from The Measured Mom. I like this one because it doesn't need dice. They know how many spaces to move by counting the words in the little sentence that they read. So it's print awareness as well.
In the cab.
How many words is that?
5.
Okay, who's next?
And the pictures are putting everything together. We are using loose parts to tap the sounds. We are using our knowledge on print formation. We are scaffolding by using skygrass ground. And these are, again, activities that happen in small group. And you can also notice that it doesn't have to be at a table. We also work on the floor. We work where the kids are comfortable. We take their lead. So these are really quick activities that can be done anywhere.
So I think it's important, and hopefully you've seen from the slides that we've shown you up until now, that reading and writing cannot be separated. Reading is breathing in, writing is breathing out. They are two sides of the same coin. So we need to make sure that kids know about decoding, which is applying the knowledge of letters, sound relationships to read words by sounding them out, and encoding, which is hearing the sounds in words and writing the letters that represent the sounds.
We're going to just spend a couple of minutes looking at some of these literacy centers. And this is where we really see more phonics-based instruction, where we're combining knowledge about the sounds and how they're connected to the letters on the page. Again, following a progression, and we start very simply with sound correspondence. Nothing is, not everything has to be super fancy. You can see that I've got a spinner on a whiteboard. It took literally 10 seconds to make. The kids are happy to play with this game on their own and like to come up with their own sounds. We move into sound sorts, much like you saw in the small group instruction, and including oral language, where we have the listening center. And then eventually we get to print formation, sounding out CBC words, using picture images to give them a little bit of scaffolding support. And then you can see that we are full on printing and spelling words using a whiteboard and a whiteboard marker.
So some more literacy center here. These ones are also spelling from pictures. So looking at a little picture card and spelling the CBC word. Those are CBC Sundays. So they write a letter for the beginning, middle, and ending sound on a scoop of ice cream. Kate's got a game there that maybe you can describe a little better. I think that one's cool. I don't have that one yet, but I want it.
So there's no pictures in here. It's almost like a crossword where the kids have to look for 3 sound words or CBC words. They take a little piece of paper and they have to cover it up. So every time they play, the game board looks a little bit different. And this is great partner work. So we're really fostering the ability to work independently.
The little guy on the bottom, I think Kate also has this activity where they have to read a short phrase, and they are checking their reading by finding the picture that matches what they've read. So they're not reading from the picture. That little guy had read a nap in a cot. We would have taught what the word cot meant, and then he found a picture to go along with it. And the last one is a quick little video of a fun game that I do where I have sentences that are decodable. So a little less daunting than a book. I put them into a magic bag and the kids sit and they take turns pulling out a sentence from the bag and then reading it.
The fox is red.
You say it fast?
The fox is red.
Good job.
Heart words. So there's a lot of confusion about what a sight word is and what a high frequency word is. High frequency words are the words that we most commonly see in text. So kids need to be able to read high frequency words to be able to start reading books. A sight word is any word that you can read. A sight word is not a word that you have memorized. A sight word is any word that you can read. It's a word that has been orthographically mapped in your brain so that you can retrieve it effortlessly.
So some of the examples of the high frequency words that we commonly see in decodable text and in everyday reading, there's a list for you there. But as Erin said, we have to map them in our brains, and that requires practice. But you can see that some of those high frequency words are fully decodable. So on, am, can, not. And some of them are partially decodable, meaning we might know the beginning sound or the end sound. Erin's going to talk about her little guy with the word you.
So I have been teaching the high frequency words that might contain some pieces of code that the kids don't know yet, but they're going to need them for being able to read. So that little guy has used Alconin boxes to map the word you. So the first sound in you, y, is spelled as we would expect. It is spelled with the letter Y. He would know that. You can tell he's got a little heart. So the second part of the word, it's in one box because it's one sound. He is learning that the oo sound in you is spelled OU. So there's just a little piece of it that they have to know by heart, maybe until that code has been explicitly taught, or there are the odd, not that many though, high frequency word that are sort of like completely irregular. So there's a couple more examples of how a heart word might look. The line indicates that it's one sound. So there's the word you and the word said. So the irregular part of said is the AI being spelling the sound eh. So it gets a line under it in a heart, and the other two pieces of code the kids should know because they're expected sounds.
Another QR code that will link you to Readsters. Great article, great PDF to download and tuck away. So we wanted to briefly share some of the assessment and data collection that we've done over the last few years. And we are mindful of time as well. So in September, I had 17 children, and you can see that the red indicates that children had no sound or no name for each of the letters. And this is sort of part of my reality in the classroom that in the school that I teach in. So we pick up from where they are and we move them forward. So we are trying to get those boxes to the green, which is where they do know the sound and the name, but the sound is important. If they have the sound and not the letter name, they're ready to read. Yeah. So this is what ended up for my June assessment. This is just part of some of the assessment data that I collect. You can notice that I have a lot of children that are absent. In fact, except for one, the rest of the students have missed anywhere between 20 and 67% of the school year. And I know it's a challenge for our school and it's a challenge for our district. It's something that we're continually working on. The white lines indicate children that have either transferred to another school or moved out of town. But just to point out a couple of things that I can glean from this assessment, I can see there for this little learner, he had his D and B mixed up when I did some one-on-one assessment. So for me, that is an easy fix. We can focus on that. We know why. We know that some letters look the same, even if they're rotated or mirrored. That is not uncommon, and we have to have kids unlearn that when they see letters that they can be flipped. So we have to unlearn and we have to retrain the brain for that. And this same little person also knew the sound for J, but he couldn't remember the letter name. And I did give him some prompts. I asked him to think about the picture mnemonic jellyfish. He did come up with the letter J eventually, but it wasn't to automaticity. And we want these kids to be able to remember them and to have them for quick recall. And another quick note is that I didn't realize until I looked at this data, this is a little guy who was attending for term 1, and then we weren't seeing him for most of term 2 and 3. But those yellow boxes are the SAT pin order. And so I found that quite fascinating that even though he had missed so much school and we had moved on code, he was able to retain the sounds to SAT pin and store them in his long-term memory. So that was a really powerful assessment piece for me.
All right, so this is my data from September, and I think it's really important I collect data at least once a month. on code. Your data drives your instruction. It's where you see what kids need, what skills targeted. So this is just an example again of basic code assessment. So September, lots of red there, lots of kids didn't know the sound or the name of the letter. What we really want to get them to at the very least is yellow. If they can look at the letter and know the sound, that's fabulous. Or, you know, ideally get them to green where they know the sound and the name. So that's my class in September. And then in June, so I ended up at the end of the year, I had all of my kids were reading in some capacity. For some, it was just CBC words. For some, they were reading words with beginning and ending blends and vowel teams. But I was able to accelerate for some kids. But for the kids who may have struggled, I know they left my classroom knowing basic code. I just wanted to point out two particular students. I did have a couple of kids who were pulled pretty much for the whole second term, so I'm not talking about them. But the first example is a little one who missed 61 days of school, so that's 41% of the year, and knows enough code to be able to start reading. There's lots of green, lots of yellow there. So that's just fabulous, and it shows the power of always reinforcing code, practicing it every day, going back over known and teaching new sounds as well. And another little one at the bottom missed 74.5 days of school. That's 45% of the year. And same thing, he has everything that he needs to be able to start reading. So I just feel like that really speaks to the power of being explicit.
Mm-hmm. We wanted to showcase some materials that we have been using and have found success with. And you'll see less is more, nothing fancy. And here are the basics that we found really important to our classroom. We have the magic bag, and I have a treasure tray. A student called it that a few years ago, and it just stuck. But these are just things we had around the classroom. Use what you have, find what you have, dig around, see what other colleagues have, collaborate with colleagues, share with colleagues. We found that to be really important because we were learning so much, and it was almost daunting to try and figure out how we were going to do it. So collaborating with colleagues, find your team, build your team is important. If you have a budget, great. If you have a limited budget, we saved it for decodable books, and we're really thankful that we had administration that were supportive of this. So we use the Flyleaf, we have the Half Pint, and we also have Bob books. We found that high quality magnet letters were really important. So none of the colorful magnets that you see in the Welcome to K bags. No. Kids will remember letters by color. That's not helpful. So we really like these ones, which I think we picked up off Amazon, where the vowels are red and the rest of the consonants are blue. You have to be adaptable, of course, and we have to just, use what we have and make do. But you can see the skygrass ground. I know, Erin, you were just laminating them last week. Preparing for September already. So there's lots of templates for Skygrass Ground, using the picture mnemonics and your code cards, and as well as whiteboards and the plastic sleeves. And I know Erin also uses her own decodable sentences, laminates them, puts them in a magic bag.
And if you don't have the books,
there's lots of
easy to come
sources.
up. There's lots of online sources. It's really easy to write up your own little sentences. And
and I know it was mentioned yesterday, we thought we'd maybe put a list together to give you a head start if you're thinking about wanting to try some of these activities, of what our go-to sites are and where you can find some of this free stuff. So we're happy to share that a little bit later. And I think we haven't mentioned it, but you'll notice there's not a lot, there's no worksheets.
No worksheets.
This is all playful. This is all game-based. This can be done on the floor, at a table. It can be done standing up. And right now, Erin and I are learning about more place-based learning, how to incorporate culture and place into our activities. So there's just a few things that we're working on that we're hoping to share with colleagues as well. Woo,
Lots to
learn. Lots to learn.
Lifelong learners, know better, do better.
My learning continues to be with oral language development. It's what my kids need. So I'm doing a lot of rich learning about that. And I know you're doing something.
I am. Oh, where did it go? I wanted to show. This is a fabulous book. I have already read it once, but I'm doing a second reading of The Art and Science of Teaching Primary Reading by Christopher Such. It is an accessible read. A lot of these books are heavy duty, and I wouldn't recommend them to people who are new to this, but this one I absolutely recommend to people who are new to the science. It's a wonderful book for a book study. He's got lots of guiding questions and things in here, but this is just really easy, helpful, informative. I highly recommend that book.
Mhm. There's the code card. If you are requiring a certificate of participation, you can use that code and scan with your phone. And we'd like to just make a couple of points before we pass it over to Dr. Garforth. Things to remember: that learning to read is not a natural process, that the brain must be rewired. And this is something that we are constantly thinking about, constantly reading about. The research is ever changing and developing. So
But it's also solid.
Oh, and it's been solid for a
Very long time.
almost 50 years. But we want to make sure that we are keeping up with the changes.
The optimal age to learn how to read is between ages 3 and 7. Now, this doesn't mean that we're teaching 3-year-olds to decode, but that's a time when we are working on building language development. We're playing with words, we're doing rhyme, we're doing alliteration. But 3 and 7, that's a pretty powerful thing to know. Kids can learn to read beyond age 7, but it gets harder. The older they get, it gets harder. We need to be thinking about those early primary years and making sure that we're getting them the foundations happening.
Tier 1 instruction, that is whole group instruction within the classroom, is explicit and systematic, and this is the best intervention. If we can really fine tune what we're doing in the classroom with our whole group and structure our classroom so that we have small group instruction as well as literacy centers, this is the best form of instruction that we can give our children.
Go as slow as you need, but as fast as you can.
I
think
love
that's-
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I picked that up in a podcast last week from Melissa and Lori, and I just think that's so important. We know that we have to scaffold and differentiate, but once the kids get code, we can move them forward.
Assessment drives instruction. It is so important to know where your kids are so you know where they need to go. You need to know what skills are missing. If you're using the scope and sequence, that makes it much easier to be able to look at what they're doing and what they're learning and be able to keep track of who knows what and what you need to target in your small group instruction.
Yeah, we talked about this. You don't need much to start. At least that's been our experience, that there's lots of great products out there, but we know that a lot of districts and schools are cash strapped. So we have to factor that in, and we make do with what we have, and we borrow and share and collaborate with our colleagues.
And teacher knowledge is key. We need to build capacity. There's so many, COVID has been, one blessing is the amount of webinars that have been free and online. There's so many places what you can go to learn more. You want to share them with your colleagues. You want to make sure that you're building capacity. The more that you know, the more that you can do with your students and make sure that we're getting them reading.
Yeah, and it's just so important to have a team. And I know I've been really fortunate that we've got a great team that is learning together. We're asking those questions, we're reaching out, and it's been a wonderful learning journey that I know will continue in the fall. Before we wrap up, we just wanted to leave you with this quote that we both have found really, really powerful. And this is part of Erin and I, our focus in advocating for literacy as a social justice issue.
So literacy is one of the greatest social justice issues of our time. Now, more than ever, children from all backgrounds are struggling to read, and both parents and educators in our communities around the world need the knowledge that equips them to do something about it. This just absolutely guides what I'm trying to do. This is my most important job. Being literate just opens up the world to children, and not being able to read just closes everything off. It's so important. So that quote was from Dr. Maria Murray, who is the founder of the Reading League.
And we have one last QR link to the Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read Inquiry Report, which obviously Dr. Garforth has mentioned yesterday. And it's just a really interesting report. If you have time to read, there's a section specifically to early learning and early literacy. Thank you very much. Choyetz at Newsom, thank you. That's a wrap. We have a couple of QR codes. If you'd like to join our Science of Reading BC group, we're almost at 2,000 members. There's a QR code there. We're also on Twitter. You can find us there. And we also have a Twitter handle that we moderate, Style BC, which is Science and Trauma Informed Literacy Education in BC. Lots of great conversations. And we have our emails if you'd like to reach out and ask questions. We're always happy to collaborate with people around the province. So again, thank you, Toyotsa Newsom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm always amazed when I watch you ladies present. There is so much knowledge, and in the comments we're saying that we need teachers like you helping guide the Ministry of Education in getting these best practices out to all educators around the province. And I say I'd have to agree. Now there are a couple questions, and we do have time, which is great. One of them is wondering where you're getting the data sheet from. Is that one that you've created yourself, or is that one? Yeah. So is it just like an Excel sheet?
I used Word and a table, happy to share if that is of help to anyone. It's nothing fancy. And we do it for lowercase, and then we also do it for uppercase when we're assessing as well.
And then I used it for digraphs and vowel teams.
And I have a separate assessment because I deal with kids that have high absenteeism. I really want to keep track of where and when and how much time has lapsed in between my assessments. So I have a separate data sheet for individual students, and then I transfer that information into my classroom. Happy to share, so we can figure that out another time, what that might look like to share.
Wonderful. And people are asking if you have an opinion on Parker phonics, and whether you feel it is good, bad, other. I think what we're trying to do in this presentation is mainly, or this symposium, is stay away from explicit products as far as programs, promoting them and speaking about them. The main thing that you want to look at when choosing a phonics program is the scope and sequence that you're looking at. And there hasn't been enough research to say that one scope and sequence is necessarily better than another scope and sequence. I know one thing that I personally like to see in scope and sequences is that the digraphs are introduced before all 26 letters of the alphabet. Just because things like TH are a lot more common than X. So doing that allows the students to become, better equipped for reading some of those higher frequency words that they're going to see in the text, and with meaningful words. What are your ladies' opinions?
We are aware of programs, and we certainly have used some programs, and no program is perfect, but it can be a launching, a starting off point, a jumping off point for many. So was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we incorporated Heggerty, but as we learned more, we knew that it wasn't a perfect program and that we had to supplement and we had to add. So I started out a little bit for term one, and then I think you did too. Yeah. And then once we had the knowledge, once we understood and felt fairly confident and fairly grounded in the knowledge that we refer to as a science of reading, we can incorporate that knowledge in other aspects of daily learning, whether it's lining up and practicing the kids' names. Which name begins with D? Okay, Dawn, you go line up. That knowledge is critical because you can then incorporate it into everything that you're doing. Yeah. You mentioned Parker Phonics. He's a free resource, and so that could be helpful in acquiring that knowledge and breaking it down and understanding how the brain learns to read.
Yeah, it definitely can. Sorry, I'm just going to respond to a question. If you are not getting the correct link based on the QR code, just give me a moment and I will send the link after Catherine has started her presentation. But while I'm moderating and asking questions, I can't do two things at once. I'm sorry about that. And you guys are going to be awesome and create a list of references for everything we talked about during this presentation. It's going to take a couple days, but it will be published with the replays. So you can access the replays on www.write the number 2 readinitiative.com, on the Right to Read Initiative YouTube channel, and in the Right to Read Initiative podcast available on the various podcast locations. I think we're going to do a blanket email saying that the replays are available to anyone that has registered for the conference. And there will be links to the various replays of the presentations, but I'm not going to do an email that has each specific download. You'll be able to go and access this. I am sure that if you follow Kate, Erin, myself, or the Right to Read Initiative, we're going to be putting this in the social media sphere once it's available as a replay, once it's available as a podcast. All of these discussions are going to be launched in the second season of the Right to Read Initiative podcast. So they will be there for you to watch. I know I personally am going to watch this presentation a few times because you guys are just full of gold. And I think you're doing an amazing job as educators. Your students are so lucky to have you. And you are definitely generous with your time. Now, if you had advice for anyone, watching this right now, what would be the first resource that you would send to them to just say, you know what, this is my favorite resource. It's going to give you the basics and a good starting point to move on from?
Oh boy. Well, we all are doing rich read alouds, so we all have access to libraries and books, so that should be great, but that is a place that I felt was important. But as far as a resource, I would think the picture mnemonic cards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if you're developing code and you're just sort of getting familiar with the alphabetic code and really wanting to try something, incorporating those code cards would be fun and engaging for the kids in the classroom, and it was $10. If you're talking about
teacher knowledge,
professional development, then this would be a great book. Christopher Such is prolific on Twitter right now, and his book has taken the world by storm. So that would be a great book to look at. And this is also, it's a bit of a dense read, but it's very systematic in its layout.
Yeah.
The logic
and
of
I
English.
think knowing
Yeah.
things about how the English language works as teachers is really important. We should be taking courses on this in our teacher training, and we're not. Lots of little tricks that you can teach kids that make code make more sense. We try to act like it's doesn't have any logic to it, any order to it, but actually there is a lot, and knowing this is important, I think.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. I personally love both of those resources, and I agree with you. It's, crucial that we are, lifelong learners. And one of those things is building our knowledge on the orthography related to English. Most people know the phonics of English, the letter sound correspondences. They may be a little bit iffy on those digraphs or the two letters that represent one sound and the trigraphs. But when it comes into the orthography and why we choose different spelling patterns in different words, there's a lot to learn there. And also moving into the morphology.
Yes.
And kids like to learn that stuff. I mean, my students, when we were learning the high frequency word have, well, what's the E doing at the end of that word? It's not making the A say its long sound. Well, the E is there because words in English don't end with V. So my kids can tell you that. Why does have a V at the end? Well, English words don't end with a V. So that's why we know we have to put an E at the end of that word so that it doesn't break the rule.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the comments, Laura saying that she has to stop telling her students that English is crazy, which is something that she's saying
It's not
hundreds
crazy.
of times a day. And you know what? Sometimes it feels like that, but when you understand the logic, it gets so much better. And I think if you are an individual that learned to read very easily, you don't really remember learning those patterns or why. It just kind of made sense. I myself am dyslexic and had to have a very systematic, explicit approach to teaching reading. So I learned a lot of these things in order to learn how to read. And one of my children has dyslexia. And when I'm working with them, teaching them the information about these spelling patterns, my husband will be in the background like, oh, I never realized that. Like, why didn't they teach me that? Well, that's the pendulum, so to say. But I think that's the important thing that we need to discuss when we're talking about the right to read public inquiry, and what we're trying to promote in this symposium is that we're not talking about a pendulum. We're talking about how the brain learns to read and giving teachers the knowledge so that they understand why English is transcribed the way that it is. This is stuff that was missed from our teacher education programs. It was missed from our programs that we did before our teacher education programs. And we need to really demand for that professional development made available to us. So teachers aren't responsible for buying all of these books, because it adds up quickly. And you hear about this great book and that great book. And then
I think part of our journey has been to really acknowledge perhaps reasonings about why children may not be reading. And we really have to develop the mindset that all children are capable of reading, that we should be at a place where 95% of our children in our classrooms are reading at grade level. And so some of the ideas that I know I was guilty of, things like, oh, well, they haven't been read to, or they're, they've missed a lot of school, or, unfortunately, these children are, dealing with trauma. I mean, those are all very real experiences for children. They're real experiences for us as teachers. And we know that they're in all our classrooms, especially during a pandemic, which has been an added layer. But we really believe that children are ready, they're capable in kindergarten, and they can develop those skills to be lifelong readers.
Yeah.
Definitely. And, when we're talking about those kids that can't access reading, we're talking about the kids that cannot comprehend spoken language. Even students who are non-speaking, or which is sometimes referred to as nonverbal, do have the capacities to learn how to read, and other ones that have cognitive impairments can still learn how to read with that explicit teaching. So we have to understand how to teach to those students that are struggling to learn to read, so that we can do better for all of our students, even the ones that are coming to kindergarten reading. There are skills that we can teach them, especially about that logic of English, so that they can understand. And that's going to help them when it comes to the encoding or the spelling of words, because they may have figured it out for reading, but then there's so many options available to them when they're trying to spell.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies. I look forward to our panel discussion in an hour and a half.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.